I look at the mining infrastructure and I divide it into three broad groups. The big group I call the elephants, the big commercial miners, and they're big and powerful, but they tend to build these monstrous facilities that are tied to the grid that are very easy to spot. So what I'll say is, they're big and powerful, that's the advantage, but they take forever to put up. So usually it takes them a year plus to get them going. And once they're there, you can't move them. So if we were in a time where it was adversarial, maybe government forces were pushing back against Bitcoin, they're the easiest ones to hunt, I say. You can go hunt the elephants and knock out a whole bunch of the infrastructure quickly. The rabbits are on the other side, right? So in other words, if there's 200 elephants in the world, you could go properly motivated, you could find them all and kill them all. But if we have hundreds of thousands or millions of rabbits, which is what I call these guys, you could go find a couple, you'd shoot a couple rabbits. But the more rabbits you shoot, the more they scatter, and the harder it will be to find them, and you'll never get all the rabbits. You probably call them cockroaches too, and I say that affectionately, right? And by the way, my company, I fit kind of in the middle in an area we call horses that I think are still big and powerful, but they're more mobile. We can move. It doesn't take as long to put them up. If we see a threat, we can move them. They're kind of hidden already, and it's very important that we not let the elephants dominate.
Hello, this is the Bitcoin Libertarian. Our guest today is Bob Burnett, a passionate Bitcoin evangelist. He is the founder and CEO of Barefoot Mining, where he is revolutionizing sustainable and accessible Bitcoin mining. With a storied background as the former CTO of Gateway Incorporated, a major player in early PC manufacturing, Bob brings decades of hardware and tech expertise to the table. He's also a key board member at Ocean Mining Pool, an advisor to M5ERS, and a guide to the infinite banking concept community. Bob's voice is a beacon for decentralization in mining, advocating for miners to reclaim their power from centralized pools and hardware grants. Today, we will talk about the actual situation of Bitcoin mining, the importance of hash rate decentralization, and a question that I bring from my channel in Spanish, if it is worth to be a solo miner nowadays. Bob, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Fernando. I appreciate you having me today.
I appreciate your time. And as I told you before, it was a long time that I wanted to interview you. I wanted to interview the top voices in the mining space. I had Lisa a couple of months ago, and now we can enjoy your expertise here. But the first question that I do to everyone is, Bob, how were you orange pilled?
In an unconventional way. As you mentioned, I came from the personal computer world, spent most of my career designing these, designing notebooks, servers, desktops, etc. And in 2017, an old acquaintance reached out to me and asked me to design and manufacture some Ethereum mining equipment. So I was wearing what I would call my computer hat at that time. So somebody was asking me to build computers for them. That's how I looked at it, and wanted a lot of them, wanted several hundred of them. So I said, "Oh, okay," and I built them for this person. And then after fulfilling that order, I started asking other people, "Would you like these?" And we got good response. And the company we now know as Barefoot Mining was created to do that. So at that point, I started looking harder at what Ethereum really was, because I was selling a lot of equipment. And I have a background going back to the early 2000s. At the end of the dot-com bubble, I became very disenfranchised with the monetary system, and I had found Austrian economics through that chaos, right? And so I already kind of had that leaning, looking for sound money and things like that. Well, I saw that Ethereum was kind of a pretender, that it wasn't real, and it had, as a technologist, I saw this is really complex. It's not really decentralized. They say it's decentralized. It's not really decentralized. And, I realized that, of course, it was trying to be better than Bitcoin. And I thought, well, it just doesn't sound that good. So let me look at Bitcoin. So I started looking harder at Bitcoin. And I realized after a while, it wasn't immediate, that it really was everything that it was made out to be. And I tried to find the technical flaws. That's one of the problems, I think, with people like me is, we have a tendency maybe to try to outsmart it sometimes, like, well, oh, there must be a problem. I'm sure it has a flaw, right? And I was humbled, but in a good way, when I realized, no, it really is what it says to be, and it's technically brilliant. It it checks off all these boxes about sound money that are very important to me. And I I realized that this being Bitcoin was probably the single greatest thing I could dedicate the rest of my professional career to. Not just because I could make money at it, but because it's what I need for my grandkids, I actually just had another grandchild last week, my sixth.
I saw the picture. I saw the picture on.
Yeah, and it changes your world a little bit. So my little granddaughter, her name's Corinne, was born last week. So she was born in the year 2025, and uh, God willing, she'll be alive well into the next century, right? And her children will be alive well into the next century, most likely even past the point where the last Bitcoin is mined. And so it for me, if my grandkids and my great grandkids have a world where we have a fair and sound monetary system, then they have a chance in life. Um, uh, but if they don't, it's really going to be hard. It's really going to be hard for them to be successful and to have a good life. And we can extend that to basically the whole world.
I agree with that. And one question that I was thinking now, I have a set of questions that I prepared for today, but you told me that you got into the Austrian economy and you started studying sound money after the dot-com boom. Then Bitcoin was created after the crash of 2008. And now, after everything that happened during the 2020 crisis, the COVID, we are starting again talking about Austrian economics and sound money. Do you think that usually humanity has the problem of the money and then goes to see the solution in Austrian economy and then it forgets? Do you think that it's going to happen this time? Or you think that Bitcoin really is proving that is the way to solve the problems of the world?
It's a good question. I think that in my life, because I'm in my 60s now, so I was there. For those that are younger, like there was a big, what we perceived to be a big stock market crash in 1987. I was early in my professional career, and it hurt. Like it was financially damaging to me. And then was about 15 years of rebuilding, right? And I did well financially in that period. And then 2001, 2002, the dot-com bubble burst. Being a guy that was involved in technology, I had a lot of money in that, and it crashed again. And I didn't lose everything, but I lost a lot. And I was very disillusioned by that. So I went and found Austrian economics. But the truth of the matter is, very few people really did. So they, I think a lot of people, I don't mean to be demeaning, but a lot of people are sheep, and they aren't independent thinkers. They're not taught to be independent thinkers, and I think that's one of the big problems in the world today, is it's becoming even less so. And so in 2001, 2002, instead of looking for alternatives, most people just went back to their traditional financial advisors. They watched the news, they listened to the Fed chairman. They just were waiting for their savior to come. And we had another on the heels of the dot-com bubble. We had a decent run in the mid 2000s, right before the crash in 2008. And then again, even the crash of 2008, you would have thought a large percentage of people would have looked, but they didn't. I would say Austrian thought, if 1% of the people in the world are even aware of, Austrian economics, I would be surprised. Kind of the same for, you go by the Bitcoin Libertarian. I think that there's obviously a lot of crossover between the Austrian thought and the libertarian principles. And I think if you just ask the average person on the street about libertarian policy, especially in the West, right? Especially in the West, they would view it as a fringe political party, almost kind of like crazy people. And, they just haven't done the work, and they haven't even sat back and said, hey, there's a almost whatever country you're in, there's typically a progressive socialist, liberal side and a conservative side, whatever you call it, right? And they don't look beyond that. They think they have to choose between those two, and even if they're dissatisfied with the one that they're in, they just leap to the other one. They don't think, well, maybe there's a third choice or a fourth choice or a fifth choice. And that's a shame. It really is a shame, and it's one of my greatest fears. And I think in the U.S., unfortunately, the education system is set up to kind of reinforce that there are only two ideas. And even the political system is set up this way. I'm on a tangent here, but back in the mid 2000s, I was associated with a group. We were trying to create our own third party, which would have been kind of a moderate party, would have had some libertarian principles, And what we found was that even with massive financial support, which we had, the system was set up such that it was very, very difficult to get candidates on ballots, and even if we won, the way that the House and the Senate, for instance, are structured, we would have no power. So anyway, it's I know we're way off topic, but the key point here is that I encourage people to have critical thinking skills and to think for themselves and stop just believing everything that is presented by the mass media and the educational system.
Yes, but I think that now we have first of all, we have the internet. We have the biggest weapon in human history, that is the mobile
Fair
phone.
point.
And we have a lot of content about this. A lot of people like me that just pick up a camera. We don't need a studio. I'm in the middle of my small apartment in Hong Kong with my computer, streaming, trying to put the word into the people's head.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. And what Bitcoin can be is not just for money, but for free thinking people. It can be kind of a catalyst to that. Because I think one thing that, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, it's very difficult to argue a case that money is not broken. Like, and I think the world Bitcoin is bringing more and more awareness to why it is broken. One of the things, you mentioned, kind of the internet. The internet was the decentralization of information, right? And people listening probably are Bitcoin oriented, and they realize Bitcoin is the decentralization of money. And what I look at was the precursor to both of those was the personal computer, which was my early career, which was the decentralization of computing. So, and I think that that is the base of the whole thing. Like, so first we had to decentralize computing, because if people did not control their own computing power, the internet couldn't work. Like, because there was no means for information dissemination. And then, on top of that, the internet happened, and now we have the decentralization money. So I think though that trifecta, could call it the holy trinity of decentralization, is, I think, the crux of the hope I have for my grandkids and my great grandkids.
Yes, yes, totally agree on that. And I think, but what I think that, and this is the last question before moving to talking about the mining, is that I think this time we don't have a chance. I think this is the last chance we have. I read. I'm sure you read, because it's one of your co-host of your podcast, and a person that I deeply admire, that is Lawrence Lepard. In his book, he plants the seed that now we have a real problem. And if we don't move to sound money as fast as possible, we are going to have huge problems that probably we are not going to come back. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. Larry's a good friend of mine, and I was honored to help him during the development of the book, and did some editing on the book, and was honored to actually have a quote in the inside cover of the book. But I think Larry is right, and I think it's this is a one-time chance, last time chance, probably in the history of humanity, to get it right, because the power structure of the world that is threatened by what Bitcoin is doing, they made a huge mistake, right? They didn't believe that such a thing could arise, and they let it get too big. It's like the virus got out of the lab. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but the virus got out of the lab and they couldn't control it. If by some chance they are able to control it, they will never let something similar happen again. It will be CBDCs to the end, and the social controls and money printing and all those sort of things will live in perpetuity. I just read one of the things I committed myself to about a year and a half ago, was rereading all of the classic kind of dystopian books, like 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451. About a month ago, I finished Atlas Shrugged. And I encourage anybody that hasn't read those books in the last, let's say, decade, to go read them again. Because if you're a Bitcoiner, if you're a libertarian, if you're an Austrian, and you read them as an adult with that base, you'll get something completely different than you got maybe reading those books in high school or college. And it should scare you. And it kind of scared me, because in Atlas Shrugged, which was like an 1,100 page book, but what you see is, squishing the independence, squishing the entrepreneur, and constantly making decisions that are, quote unquote, for the betterment of society, which is socialism. And of course, in the end, it all crumbles. But if you read it, you'll see, hey, we're kind of far down the same path. Like we're not in the early stages. We're kind of in in the middle stages of this, especially on a global basis, and that's scary.
Yes.
But Bitcoin is our hope. Bitcoin is
Yes.
our hope.
Now that you mention, and I will take your advice. I read Fahrenheit 451 when I was a teenager. In fact, I have this book in my mom's house, signed by Ray Bradbury. I met Ray Bradbury, and
Wow,
he signed this book to me when I was a
fabulous.
teenager. So when I come back to Argentina, I will pick up this book and I will reread again now. But I
Please
remember
do.
that book. I've always been a huge fan of Ray Bradbury, and I will reread this book again. So let's move to talk a little bit about mining. What is the status of mining today? When we started the Bitcoin revolution, you can even mine Bitcoin. The stories of people mining 50 Bitcoins with a laptop, and then probably set up some mining stuff at home. These years are over, and now there is a lot of critique against the centralization. Now the big miners are listed companies that control the hash rate. How is the status? Is there any problem? And how can we move forward to solve this problem?
There's good news and there's bad news. So the good news, I'll start with the good news. The good news is we have more computing power or hash power in the network than ever before. We're basically at 1 zettahash. So, which is 1,000 exahashes, which is 1,000,000 petahashes, which is 1,000,000,000,000 terahashes. Like it's a mind we cannot comprehend. That's per second, by the way.
Yeah, per second.
We cannot, as human beings, comprehend these numbers. Even a guy with a math science background like myself, I cannot put my arms around these numbers. But it's massive. We have lots of capital still willing to flow into mining. So lots of, both at the individual level and at the institutional level, money is still willing to flow into mining. So there's people that have hope for it. I would say that's the good news. The bad news is that mining is more subject to centralization than any other aspect in the Bitcoin ecosystem. It and it has been, I would say, succumbing to a lot of those forces, and those come in several different ways. One way is in the chip manufacturing. So there's a specialized chip that we use. It's an ASIC, which stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuit. It's specifically designed for Bitcoin. So ASIC, by the way, is a generic term. Bitcoin didn't invent it. I started working with ASICs in the late 80s. But we have a special one that we use in our community that performs the SHA-256 algorithm, which is kind of the guts of the mining process. Bitmain, which I'm sure almost everybody has heard of if you're in Bitcoin, is the dominant player. They have about an 80% market share. They haven't been seriously threatened in that for several years, and that's scary. We need it's kind of like if for computer CPUs, if we only had Intel to choose from. It's somewhat similar. Now, the good news there, by the way, is that like Proto, which is Jack Dorsey's company, has just come out with a new product based on their own ASIC. We have some companies like Aurodyne, for instance, that have come out in the last year. You mentioned in the intro, I'm working with a company called M5ers. We're developing our own chip. So there are several. So that one probably worries me the least. but it is something that needs to be considered, because the bad news about an ASIC is that if you decide you want to design one, first you have to find one of maybe the right couple hundred people in the world capable of designing one. That's a very small group of people. And then you have to go raise about $30 million. So just to get started. So that restricts that quite a bit. The area I think most people are concerned about is in the pools. And the pools, for those less familiar with mining, there are about 7.5 million servers in the world today. It's some interesting stats. So when I talk about that one zettahash, there's about 7.5 million systems working simultaneously to achieve that number. Each year, there are about 53,000 blocks that are won. So what does that mean? That means that all mining by themselves, almost all of those machines would not earn any money if they worked independently. So if each of the 7.5 million worked by themselves, 53,000 of them would win something. By the way, that'd be like $350,000. The rest of them would get nothing. So we work in pools, collectives. So if I have 10 machines and Fernando, you have 20 machines, we can kind of put them together. And if I win it, you still get 2/3 of the money. And if you win it, I still get 1/3. Like, we agree to share. And that concept is called pooling. And what has unfortunately happened is that the number of pools in the world who are effectively win most of the blocks is, maybe, if I'm being generous, 5 or 6. But in reality, it's 2 or 3. Foundry and what we call pool and proxies. And so what does that mean? That means that they get to pick which transactions go into blocks. And so the potential for things like censorship, which is something we're all vehemently opposed to, become higher. Now, I have no evidence that there is any censorship. I don't think there is right now. I'm not accusing anybody of that at the moment. However, it is a major threat. And
it can happen.
It can happen, right?
It's not happening, but can happen.
It can happen. And I think that's what we have to, in Bitcoin, you can either, there's sometimes I get frustrated. I have a different philosophical difference. I think some people say, well, don't worry about it, because if that happens, we will change. And I say, well, I think that's a very dangerous, that's a reactionary response. And I think we have to have a proactive response to this. And we have to assume it will happen. And even if that chance is 0.1% in a given year, that's too high. Like, we're at this point where we're already exposed. So that's part of the reason I'm with Ocean, which Ocean is a pool that was introduced about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. We now control about 1.5 to 2% of the world's blocks. So still not that's big enough to be in the top 10, by the way, but not big enough, to be honest, not big enough to matter yet. Right? We're growing. I'm optimistic, but we're not big enough to really make a difference. Now, that leads to, so why is that the case? Because of those 7.5 million machines, each of those machines and the person behind it can make their own choice about how they want to mine. They can join a pool, any pool they wish, or they can mine themselves. And if you're a smaller person mining, you probably do need to join a pool. If you're a commercial vendor, by the way, we'll talk about individual miners in a minute, maybe. But if you're a commercial miner, you should probably join one of the pools. And as you mentioned, we've reached the point where, because mining is big business, because about 33 to 35% of the global hash rate of all the computing power is now in the hands of publicly traded companies. This would be Riot, CleanSpark, etc. Those companies almost unilaterally direct their hash rate at one of the two big companies. That's why there's such concentration. So if we could get a change in behavior from the big companies to either self-mine or to, meaning they don't join a pool, they just kind of take their own resources and collectively mine, or at least join a smaller pool and diversify it, we would have a much healthier hash rate, much healthier ecosystem that was more decentralized.
Excellent. And mine, you mentioned ocean mining pool, and how is helping to spread out the mining power.
Well, there's a couple key attributes of ocean. The first one is, if you join any of the big pools, they're essentially all KYC pools. Okay, so to join them, you must get the permission of the pool, and you must disclose who you are and where you are and all those sort of things. And by the way, you get paid by them. You don't get paid by the Bitcoin network. Okay. So Ocean changes that dramatically. The first is, when you sign up, all you do is you tell the pool, this is my Bitcoin address where I want to receive my proceeds. And that's it. That's the only. So it allows people anywhere in the world without KYC to participate. And I think that helps tremendously. Secondly, when people receive their money, they receive it directly from the Bitcoin network. So when a block is produced, one of the transactions, usually it's the one listed first in the transaction, is called the Coinbase transaction. Not to be confused with the exchange, but the Coinbase transaction. And that transaction allows individual miners to connect it to Ocean to get their money directly from the Bitcoin network. So not only is it KYC free, it's what we call virgin Bitcoin too. Like there's no trail to it. So I think that helps. But the biggest thing about Ocean is that each individual miner has the right to create their own template. So what that means is, like, everybody that connects to Foundry, which is about a third of all the world's hash rate, is working on a single template. So what that means is that at a given point in time, Foundry has gone into the unconfirmed transaction pool called the mempool. They've chosen which transactions from that mempool they feel should be mined next. And everybody in the pool is trying to work on that same template. Okay, there's no diversity. In Ocean, each individual participant in the pool can pick their own. We still share the proceeds, as I mentioned before, if the same way one before, but we're each working on something differently. And that provides that censorship resistance we talked about before, because I could be sitting here in the US with my hash rate and I've made my selections, and you're sitting in Argentina or Hong Kong or wherever you may happen to be in the world, and you picked yours. And we can use whatever criteria we wish to pick the transactions.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. If I join, I will put machines in my mom's house in Argentina because the energy there is much, much cheaper than the energy here in Hong Kong. And how can a person, needs to be a company, or can any person who with miners can join the pool?
Anybody of any size. Listen, we don't know. When I say we, I mean Ocean. We don't know who you are or how big you are. We have no idea. And so even if you'll bear with me one second, even something as small as this, which this is a BitX here. If you haven't seen it or people haven't seen it. So this is a small mining system. I have it in my office here. And even though I have commercial operations that are pretty big, as a person, just Bob, I run this in my house. And that's my what can I say? At a personal level, it gives me a satisfaction that I'm controlling what's going on right there, and I find that really cool.
Yes, I interviewed the guy, I think was Solo Satoshi, that they sell the VDAX, and he was telling that it's more like, it's not that you are gonna mine one full Bitcoin or one full block and get the reward, but it's more like you are supporting the network. Like
Yeah,
it's like running a node.
yeah, yes. I think it's very similar. See, for those people that are maybe new to Bitcoin, one thing to understand is that at the beginning of Bitcoin, everybody was a miner. Everybody ran a node, and everybody was a miner. Like that's what you had to do. And from a decentralization perspective and censorship resistance, it was phenomenal. Bitcoin didn't have these risks that we have talked about before. And I think a lot of people look at mining as something where the miner is purely economically motivated to make the most money on the next block. And I have arguments, by the way, with others in the community who think that that's the way it should always be. And I say, no, I think that there is a segment, and it's growing, as you said. Like these devices have been phenomenally successful, and they've created a resurgence of individuals mining. And most of the people are realistic about it. They realize that they are losing money plugging this in, but what they are doing is they are expressing themselves. They are expressing their independence. They are fighting decentralization. And thank God, we have a segment of the community, and I think that I call anybody that's in this class, by the way, a rabbit. And one of the things I do is I look at the mining infrastructure, and I divide it into three broad groups. The big group I call the elephants, the big commercial miners, and they're big and powerful, but they tend to build these monstrous facilities that are tied to the grid that are very easy to spot. So what I'll say is, like they're big and powerful, that's the advantage, but they take forever to put up. So usually it takes them a year plus to get them going. And once they're there, you can't move them. So if we were in a time where it was adversarial, maybe government forces were pushing back against Bitcoin, they're the easiest ones to hunt, I say. Like you can go hunt the elephants and knock out a whole bunch of the infrastructure quickly. The rabbits are on the other side, right? If there's so in other words, if there's 200 elephants in the world, you could go properly motivated, you could find them all and kill them all. But if we have hundreds of thousands or millions of rabbits, which is what I call these guys, you could go find a couple, you'd shoot a couple rabbits, But the more rabbits you shoot, the more they scatter, and the harder it will be to find them. And you'll never get all the rabbits. You probably call them cockroaches too, and I say that affectionately, right? And by the way, my company, I fit kind of in the middle in an area we call horses, um, that I think are still big and powerful, but they're more mobile. We can move. It doesn't take as long to put them up. If we see a threat, we can move them. They're kind of hidden already. Um, and it's very important that we not let the elephants dominate, because the elephants the elephants are almost all publicly traded companies, by the way, too. They have a right to exist, um, and do as they wish. That said, it doesn't mean I have to like them, because I think by definition, when you become a public mining company, especially, you are placing yourself in a position where the best long-term path for your company, or the best short-term path for your company, and the best long-term interest of Bitcoin will come to a head at some point. You will find a point where, geez, I can do the best thing to make more money in the next 90 days, but it's not the best thing for Bitcoin in the long run. And as a public company, you're probably going to choose the short-term interests. And I worked in as the chief technical officer and an executive vice president in a Fortune 200 company, and I can tell you that the pressure inside a company to perform every 90 days is tremendous. And it's, by the way, it's measured in fiat, not in Bitcoin. So we know elephants are going to exist, but we have to make sure that the horses and the rabbits, which I think primarily are aligned with Bitcoin's ethos and will make decisions that maybe sacrifice short-term gain for long-term benefit, or as I call it, protecting the mothership. We have to be in a position where we can always counteract these other forces.
Yes, I like the analogy between the elephants, the rabbits, and the horses, because usually it's what happens in nature. If we see the creatures, there are a lot of living organisms like cockroach and many other small creatures that are even older than dinosaurs. And when the
Yes.
asteroid came, the dinosaurs, the big dinosaurs, now are either bones or either petrol to fill the
Yes.
cars. So
Yeah.
so that's what's happened, and that is the magic of decentralization. Because I'm a very, sometimes I think about Bitcoin 24/7, and I'm, for example, watching a movie that is some catastrophic movie, like there is this dystopian catastrophe,
Yeah.
and I always say, but if this happened, for example, there is the movie that is from the 90s, Deep Impact, or
Yeah.
Armageddon,
I know that
like
one. Sure.
the asteroid hit the Earth. If this happened, and I have my node, and you have a small miner, you can restart the Bitcoin network easily with the
Yes.
people that when the world restart. But if you put all the power in the big corporations, of course, they will probably don't restart the operation.
Yes.
So I like this analogy.
Yeah, it's I obviously I promote this, and I feel very strongly about it. I think that's why I think it's just like politics to a certain degree, right? I think a lot of people think, "Oh, my vote doesn't count." It's the same mentality, like, no, your vote does count, and and it's the same here. This is your vote in Bitcoin. Running your node, of course, and doing something like this. It keeps the power decentralized. It
Yeah.
keeps collectively, the rabbits and cockroaches.
Yeah, that
Um,
was I was checking the video. I don't have it yet, but we are about to move to a bigger office and set up some studio for the podcast with my business partner. And I was telling him I want to run, of course, in the new office a node and a VTAX. Why? And he said no, but the probability to mine a Bitcoin with this is almost zero. And I said I don't care. It's not about mining the Bitcoin. It's about
correct.
contributing. It's about being a Bitcoiner, because I think that we are going to enter into a new stage of Bitcoin where are going to remain the Bitcoiners, the ones that will keep running either the network or the narrative or the education, and then people that will accept Bitcoin as something that exists and will use every day, but they are not going to be involved in the control or the educational side of Bitcoin.
Yeah, correct. One of the things I've spoken about, and especially the last year, is I believe that each of us, when you buy Bitcoin, I think you become a citizen of Bitcoin. That I believe we are kind of a country of common patriots. And so you and I've met for the first time today, but I know you are my brother in the fight. Okay. And so, but I think, like being a citizen of anything, if you don't vote, if you aren't willing to serve in the military, if you aren't willing to serve on a jury duty, if you won't pay taxes, like you're not being a good citizen. And I think in Bitcoin, I think the word hodl, while it has both positive and negative aspects. And I think people haven't talked about the negative side of this very much, because I think what it does is it perpetuates the thought process that if I just buy Bitcoin and do nothing and let it sit there, that I'm going to get rich. Well, if every person involved in Bitcoin made the same decision, it won't work. It will collapse. So, you have to running a node and being a miner. It's kind of like voting, and like I view being a miner. My role as a miner is to secure the network. And so I'm serving in the military, basically. Like I'm you're the warrior if you're a miner. And if you have a node, you're voting. If you're using Bitcoin, you're doing kind of the equivalent of paying taxes. You're keeping the financial infrastructure alive. And so I think this is the way we have to think. And that's why I've pushed back, especially in the last year, on the word hodl, because I I don't think it's communicating the proper behavior set, in especially for newbies.
That's the point. That's the point. Yeah, something that I like to do. Of course, I don't like. I'm not gonna change Bitcoin to buy, sell Bitcoin to buy me a car or a house. But something that I like to do when I met a shop that accepts Bitcoin, I like to go and buy. For example, I discovered a shop that, by the way, is the episode in the YouTube channel. A shop here in Hong Kong, a coffee shop that you can pay with Lightning. So I was around Hong Kong. I discovered that shop and went and paid. For sure, this coffee in 5 years is going to be the most expensive coffee I ever bought. But I don't care. I contribute to this to show that Bitcoin has another application that can be used to pay. And this is the way. When I go to a Bitcoin conference, I like to buy food and drinks with Lightning, not with credit card, because
Yeah,
it's the way that we have to
exactly.
push the adoption.
Yeah, I'm glad that you do that. I try to do the same thing, and I think people that don't do that are kind of missing the message. So if there's a pile of Bitcoin, I think that you should never touch. Like everybody should, build that pile. But using your coffee example, you could go to that coffee shop and use fiat. Let's say the equivalent of $10 of fiat. And what have you done? You have supported the fiat network, and you've done nothing to help the Bitcoin network. If instead what you did is you went and bought the equivalent of $10 using Bitcoin, and then you went home and you bought $10 of Bitcoin and filled your wallet back up. Now you've
Yeah.
supported the Bitcoin network. You've done a Lightning transaction, and you've probably done an on-chain transaction of some sort. So, or at a minimum, 2 Lightning transactions. But at a minimum, you are supporting the network, and I think that's the way to think about it.
That's the point. And the funny thing is that the money I use in the Lightning Network is usually the in my wallet of Satoshi that I use is money that I get from using Noster. That this is something that I like to also to tell to the people. I use Noster and I get SAP. I get 20 Satoshis, 100 Satoshi, 5 Satoshis, and I collect them. And then I go and I buy. I think that the sats that I receive from Noster or from sapping after the episode or whatever, I don't have to hold because the people is sending to me, so I have to spend because this
There you go.
money needs to circulate to again to
Yes.
make the network stronger, to show the people that we can that this is Bitcoin, that we can use as money, we can store as a store of
Yeah.
value, and that
Yeah.
makes the
Yeah.
Bitcoin network stronger.
Yeah. And as I said, we don't, there's no such thing as a Bitcoin tax, right? To use the net. Well, it's just fees. And so even when you're using Lightning, you're supporting those Lightning channels, and Lightning channels open, they close, you can splice them. You can do things that create financial activity. And, ultimately that's what we need with Bitcoin. Right now, as a miner, 97 to 99% of my money comes from the subsidy. But that's going to change dramatically, over the next 10 years even. It'll change dramatically. And we need that economic activity to keep the mining network strong. Now, I'm optimistic about it. Some people freak out about it and think that they'll call it the security budget. Bitcoin doesn't have a security budget. If people don't use Bitcoin and generate fees, then the protocol's doomed. There's a lot of people who feel that way. I don't feel that way. The caveat being, people have to behave like you do and use the network.
Yes, I love paying with Bitcoin. Again, this is money that I collect from using Noster, from sapping to me, or usually sometimes I do some collaboration. How do I pay? Sat me, whatever you want. That's why I like to make this Lightning, this Bitcoin circulate. And talking about mining again is you founded Barefoot Mining and focus on wild mining of the grid. Why is better? Because I talked about this with Lisa Hoff, and she was like pushing a lot of the grid mining. And why do we need of the grid mining? Only for national security, or also for like commercial or Bitcoin network security?
Okay, great question. Okay, so mining, we talked about rabbits and horses and elephants already, right? Now, there's a second dimension. And the dimension is, are they captive or are they wild? So if they're animals, right? Are they captive or are they wild? Just like a zoo animal, right? So that you can have an animal in a zoo and you can have an animal running wild. Well, the captive animals, which almost all the elephants are captive and some of the horses, they are dependent on somebody else to provide the power. They buy the power from somebody. Now, there can be some positives of that. There's a lot of people that speak very eloquently about what Bitcoin can do to balance grids, curtailment, working cooperatively with the grid. And those are all true, by the way. I'm not saying they aren't. However, the common element is somebody else, not the miner, decides if they're getting power. And and also somebody else, their competency dictates whether or not you're going to get power. Marathon had a site, I might be wrong, but I think it was maybe 2.5 years ago, a large site in Montana in the US. I think it was about 50 megawatts. And the substation blew up that provided that power. And it was something like 8 or 9 months to replace that substation. So again, an elephant. So you had an elephant dependent on a third party, and they were basically out of business at that site because of that. It's very easy for bureaucrats and legislators to either cut the cord and say you can't get power, or tax that power, or like those sort of things. Okay, so I call that captive mining. So what does wild mining mean? Wild mining means we make our own power from our own power source, and nobody else can tell us what to do with the power. So if you want to be sovereign in your mining, then you have to control the power, and you have to control the hash rate, and you have to control the template. And if you do all those things, then there's nobody that stands in the way of you mining, or deciding what you mine, or where the money goes that you collect for mining. And that's what I want. That's wild mining. So we made a decision, really going back to about 2019. We didn't start that way. We still have a small amount of on-grid profile, but we decided, hey, we don't like where this is going. And like here in the US, when the political power was held by people like Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, well, they didn't like us. They were very adversarial to us. And so, that threat was very real. Well, so the first thing we did, my first venture in this, was I found an old textile mill that ran their own power plant off of hydroelectric power on a river. And so I went there, liked what I saw. It cost a fair amount of money, but we rebuilt the whole hydroelectric infrastructure. Hadn't run for 20 years. And now we mine by ourselves. And nobody can tell us what to do. Now, here's the interesting thing, though. It's cheaper. It's way cheaper than it costs more money initially. So that's the bad news. It requires more capital up front. But we can mine with operational costs way below what we can buy from on the grid. We're not paying for transmission costs. We're not paying taxes. There aren't multiple hands to feed, people trying to make profit in the middle of us. It's just us. So we started with hydroelectric. Then we went to a facility in Indiana where we're adjacent to a dairy farm, and we're doing what's called anaerobic digestion, taking the excrement from the dairy farm, putting it through a process to accelerate the generation of methane, and feeding that into to mining there. And then now what we're doing, we're really focused on natural gas, where we find natural gas wells that typically are what we call stranded, meaning they don't have a good place to take gas out of the ground and feed it into a pipeline that's not available for whatever reason. But we go there and put up a mining operation and mine there. See, here's the other thing. Mining, I think mining is going to have a fight in the captive situation additionally. So the AI and high performance computing worlds, they want the same energy. So if you take all the world's on-grid electricity, there's a little over 30,000 terawatt hours of energy produced annually everywhere, from India to the US to Albania to whatever, right? Now, of that, my estimate is only 6% of the 30,000 terawatt hours is offered at a price cheap enough that you could commercially mine. So that reduces the 30,000 terawatt hours globally to about 1,500 that are, and I call that the mining zone. That's all that's available. Now, all of that energy is already being sold to somebody. Of the 1,500, 200's being used by the mining world today. There's about 4% growth in power production around the world. And I think that will be true about the mining zone too. But again, now, unlike 5 years ago, the Bitcoin mining industry has to fight these other industries. Where I'm going with all this is I believe it's going to be very difficult for Bitcoin mining to appreciably grow its power footprint on grid, because there's not that much available, and we have to fight these other industries for it. The big guy, I'm talking about the big companies. So I think the future of successful mining can only be done two ways. One way is off grid, which is what we're doing. The other way is really more driven from the AI perspective. It's more AI companies who will mine with leftover energy. So it's and again, it's unfortunate because we will not have people with a Bitcoin mindset running those organizations. It'll be even worse than what we have today, where I think largely the publicly traded companies are not good Bitcoiners.
Do you think that this can change the mindset of the people who run the company to become more Bitcoiners with all the boom of Bitcoin treasury companies?
It depends on what you call a Bitcoiner. I think they will be supportive of Bitcoin, but they'll still view it through a fiat lens. So are they Bitcoiners because they own Bitcoin, because publicly they say they like Bitcoin? Yes. But are they truly Bitcoiners? No.
This is what I was talking at the beginning, like the people who is coming now, probably they will hold Bitcoin, they will use Bitcoin, they will talk about Bitcoin, I like Bitcoin, but they are not going to be true Bitcoiners, like the people who is supporting everything until now. I'm talking about the zeta hash per second that we are all, because usually they talk about the price and all the thing, but one of the graphics that say this is amazing because we are in the all-time high of hash rate. This 1 zeta hash per second, what does mean for Bitcoin safety and for everyday users?
Well, as the positive is that this is now the most powerful network in the world. And for somebody to what's called 51% attack the network, it's almost impossible coming from the outside. Now, is it possible as an inside job? Maybe, because of the pool centralization. But it's not like if the US and Russia and China all got together today and they said, we're going to go try to build a competing mining network and 51% attack the network. they couldn't do it. It would be impossible. There's just not enough. There's not enough machines. There's not enough power. We could see it coming. All those sort of things. So it gives us that security. 15 years ago, if those governments said, "Hey, Bitcoin is a real threat, so we better just squish it now," they could have done it. Like, it would have been fairly easy for them. I mentioned this earlier. They missed their chance, right? So, um, so anyway, the positive is it gives us this, but I'll go back to that other thing. We have to make sure that within that one Zeta hash, we reduce the pool concentration, we diversify the template creation, we reduce the KYC profile, like those sort of things I think are very important. Yeah.
Excellent. And to start finishing the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about your podcast, Bitcoin for Boomers. What was the idea, and how is it structured?
Well, so it's three people coming together. Larry the Party you mentioned before, myself, and Gary Leland. We are three of the, let's say, older members of the community. We're all boomers by definition. And we think two things. One is, for younger people, there's a lot of angst toward boomers, a lot of belief that boomers have ruined the world for them. They can't buy a house, things are too expensive, blah blah blah. And I think we want to, one, dispel that and bridge the divide between the generations. But the more important part is that boomers themselves, outside of Bitcoin, clearly have most of the wealth in the world. By the way, that's always true. Whatever the oldest generation alive is, always has had most of the wealth, just the way the world works. But we want to show other people that there are boomers who truly believe in this. And we're a nice mix. I'm a technologist. Larry comes from a sound money perspective. Gary comes from a small business and communications background. So we're trying to have three different perspectives. Hopefully, one of us can always relate to somebody within the boomer community. But Bitcoin will be a lot better if the boomers are on our side. I mean, that's so our goal is to create that. And we've been very fortunate that we have the support of BTC Sessions, who's got a massive following, and the show will be distributed through his network, which has got, like YouTube alone is almost 400,000 subscribers. So it gives us kind of out the get-go. And I respect what you're doing, and I've done it myself. It's hard to build traction, and Ben has done a great job building that, and has been kind enough and trusting enough of us to let us leverage his channel.
Yes, building the traction is more difficult for me. The biggest part is that when I'm starting to get traction, YouTube bans our channel. So that's why we created our stream, and now we have next. I create a new YouTube channel, but next ban, I'm not coming back to YouTube. So we are gonna stream from our platform, and no deal anymore with YouTube. Probably uploading to Rumble. And what is the most difficult thing to orange peel boomers?
Most boomers have been reasonably successful. And so to tell them that the existing monetary system is failing the world is often hard for them to see. And when I say most boomers have been successful, I'm talking about more the educated people in the Western countries. and it hasn't been successful on a global basis. And my you have roots in Argentina. My wife grew up in the Philippines. When you've lived in a place like that, and um you have a much easier time seeing Bitcoin, regardless of what age you are, because you've seen what happens when money's broken. But when you live in the US, especially, and you've been reasonably successful, maybe you're retired now and I live in Florida, you have a nice house in Florida, you have a nice car, you don't worry about your groceries next week. You don't realize that a very small percentage of the people have had that, and also that maybe your life would even be way better if you hadn't been robbed, because the truth of the matter was you were robbed. And so then it's hard for them to say, well, we need Bitcoin um because the money is broken. Well, it's hard for them to get it. But what's positive is I think some of the boomers are starting to realize that it's hard for their children. Like, some of their children are struggling and they see it. So that, I think that helps. And I think right now we're seeing a lot of global turbulence, right? Whether that's in Nepal or, in Europe, or, certainly in the US. And hopefully they get that the money is at the root cause. So that's the funny thing, is like when I talk to younger generations, and they'll get angry because I'm a boomer, and they'll say, it's your fault. They don't mean me personally, but your generation's fault. I'll say, well, you're you have the right and you're justified in being angry, but you're angry at the wrong place. You should be angry at the money, the monetary system, and the people that control the monetary system. You should not be angry at a generation. It's a small group of people doing nefarious, malicious things through the monetary system, not a generation.
Yes, yes, totally, totally agree. Yesterday, I made a video in Spanish for my channel in Spanish, explaining the website WTF happened in
Oh, yeah.
1971,
Yes.
explaining point by point, and watching what happens when the money is broken. Because even though in my country, in Argentina, that we've been through hyperinflations, the money is super broken, people don't understand. People don't understand about Bitcoin, about this thing. And also, I think that for boomers, there is also the time preference. For example, I was talking to one of my friends' dad, um, that he invests in stock. And I was telling about strategy or some other stocks, and the Bitcoin ETF, because he doesn't want to go on chain. And I said, you need to wait like at least 5 years. And he said, no, it's a lot of time. So that's the other thing. Also, my mom, she's 74. She has properties. She doesn't want to listen anything related about Bitcoin. She knows that there is something that is Bitcoin because of me, but not nothing. She's okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. Even in Argentina, I actually have a gentleman from Argentina that lives in my community here in Florida. And when I talk to him about money, he'll express all these different reasons why Argentina has had the issues it's had, except for the money. Like, he can't quite get it. Like,
As Argentinian, the biggest problem that we always had was that the governments print a huge amount of money. There is a complex situation, political. You need to understand what is happening. The other day, for example, Safedin did a post about Argentinian president or something like that. I support the Argentinian president with all his mistakes, but I told him, Safedin, I respect you. You probably wrote the best economic book of history. But in this, to talk about Argentina, when the president is doing, you need to understand the history of Argentina, the history of the economics of Argentina, all the mismanagement that has been done through all the history, and then you are going to understand what the president is doing. But I don't want to talk about politics because I don't like politics. I always said, based on Brian Demeen, that you don't have to vote for politicians. You need to vote every day, and you can vote every day for Bitcoin 24/7, 365 days per week, per year. As you said, running a node, having a VDAX, spending your Bitcoin. This is the way to vote for Bitcoin every single day. And to finish the conversation, I have two more questions. The first of all is, what do you think about the future of Bitcoin?
I think that Bitcoin's only enemy is complacency. People not doing what you just very eloquently, I think, summarized. That's just, and if it does that, if people take that to heart, then it will be money for the next 1,000 years. And so I'm very, very hopeful. But as I said, it is the last and only chance we will have to fix this. That's it. So I'm hopeful, but we can't let our guard down. We haven't won anything yet.
Yes, we need to keep fighting. We need to keep doing what we are doing, and I like what you said, because sometimes we said we already won, Bitcoin already won, and no, we need to keep our guard high, protecting Bitcoin, and because I do agree with you, is the last chance we have for humanity. And the last question is, if you had the chance to sit down with Satoshi Nakamoto and have a coffee, what would you ask to him, her, or them?
I would want to know about Satoshi's youth. What created Satoshi? Um, uh, where did he study? What was his familial structure like? What was his mother like? My wife is a Bitcoiner, and we had this conversation several times. Said, well, who I think a lot of things come down to a mother, right? We respect mothers a lot. So who created this person that was such a free thinker, first of all? Like, it encouraged his imagination and his creativity, gave him confidence to go build something like this, number one. And number two, and maybe more importantly, to strip his ego out, like, and make him so selfless that he could create such a thing and walk away. And didn't take the wealth, didn't take the fame, didn't take the power. Like, I want to know how that happened, because I think it's unique. I mean, I'm a Christian. And I don't worship Satoshi, but I admire Satoshi tremendously. But I think, well, I'm hard pressed since the birth and life of Christ to come to another person who has exhibited this level of selflessness. Now, maybe Gandhi did, or maybe there's some other people in other parts of the world that I don't know enough about them. But we're talking about a very small amount. In fact, my wife and I, we're part of a group called Bitcoin Trading Cards, which literally is what it sounds. It's little cards like this, that are trading cards. And we worked with the creator of the cards to create a card called Mother Satoshi in homage to Satoshi's mother, like saying this must have been a phenomenal person, and we should pay tribute to her as well as him.
Okay, it's like something like similar to the Catholic faith. That in the
Yes.
Catholic faith, it's not in other Christian faith, but in the Catholic faith, we pay a lot of tribute to Holy Mary,
Mother Mary.
that is the mother of God. So
Yes.
I love this. I love this answer. I receive many different answers to the question that I do, but this is amazing. This together with one that a girl asked that say I would ask what is his morning routine or his night routine, because it speaks a lot about a person. But this answer is, or this question that would you ask to Satoshi is one of the best. So Bob, anything else you want to add, and how people can contact you?
I am active on Twitter at boomer_BTC. I do have, we're just launching our show right now called the Bitcoin Boomers. You can find it through the BTC Sessions channel. I have my own show called Old Man Yells, and trying to get a little more involved with Nostra. Just it's a time issue, like all these different platforms. But I love what's happening there, and I want it to be successful. My company is called Barefoot Mining. If you want to learn about that, we do occasionally take investors on new projects. So if that's of interest to you, you can reach out to us. And of course, Ocean, if you do decide to become a miner, you can visit us at Ocean and see if our pool might be a good entry point for you into mining.
Excellent, Bob. Thank you very much for your time. Has been a pleasure talking to you. An amazing chat, and wish you the best. And I hope to meet you in any conference of Bitcoin.
Thank you so much, Fernando.
And when you meet Larry, please send him my greetings. I had him a couple of months ago, and I'm still waiting to meet him so he can sign my book, the Big Print. So, Bob, again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you very much to everyone who is on the other side. If you like the episode, please give us a thumbs up. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel and to all our social media. Share this episode with the people you love. Share this episode with the people you hate, because we must reach 8 billion people and bring them to Bitcoin. See you in our next episode of our podcast. Stay humble, stack sats, and remember, we are all Satoshi.